high. So what we're going to do with the sloper to fit it, especially if you're doing one that's a personal size, is we're going to trace the sloper. So I would trace off my center back. You don't trace all your lines. I usually do the vertical ones first, so I'll do that. So that's my center back. Here's my side seam. I'm going to trace my darts. So here's the dart. Because we need to make the bottom of the dart, we need to true it up. We also need to make sure that the side seam and the shoulder seams match from front to back. I'm going to mark this dart. Typically at the end of a dart, you have a little dot. Here's my shoulder seam. Actually, when you do the seam, if you come right to the center of the dart, and then when you do the other side, come up to the center, they should join, and you should see that the end of the dart here goes up a little bit. It does not go straight across. You wouldn't have enough fabric to make that work. So I'm going to put a little hash mark here where the back neck is. And so the next thing we want to do, I'm going to do the same thing at the underarm. Just make a little line. We're going to take the plastic ruler and we're going to trace the waistline. So again, you want to go up and match the part of the curved ruler to what you did before. So you'll have to kind of manipulate it. So I'm going to come across from B, which is the center back, to the center of my dart. And you'll note that as I come across at the end of the dart here, it's dropping down, and that's correct. Then I'm going to come back from M, which is the side, to the in the dart. And again, it's dropping down. Oops, my pen. It's running out of ink. So this dart also comes down to a little point. So then we want to mark our collar line or neckline in the back. So I'm tracing that. There's our neck. And then I want to trace. You might want to put something on your tracing paper so that it doesn't move. It's really awful when you wind up moving everything around on yourself. And then we're going to trace this armhole. My pen is running out of ink. Okay, so we've got all of our coordinates there. I'm going to take this draft out from underneath, and then you can see the pattern. I'm going to put like plain paper under here so that you'll be able to see the pattern. So then the next thing we want to do is we want to add seam allowances to our pattern. You always have to add seam allowance if you're going to be able to sew this. So let's see if I can get the whole thing in the camera lens. This has been tough. Maybe I'll turn it sideways. Let's see. Oh yeah, that works better. Okay. So let's just make that so it doesn't move. Now, this is your center back. So there would probably wind up being a zipper in the center back if this was a, if we were making a dress. If it's a shirt and it buttons in the front, then it would be cut on the fold. For the purpose of fitting, I'm going to leave the back open and I'm going to add a 1-inch seam allowance. So if I use this clear ruler, I lay it on the 1 inch, I can just come across and that's a seam allowance. And it's always a good idea to mark that it's a 1-inch seam allowance. I need a center line on this little dart here. And then around the neck and the rest of the garment, we're going to do 1/2 inch. So on the seam allowance where it goes from the back out, make sure that's squared up. You don't want anything that's curvy. It wouldn't work. And a lot of times I just manipulate this ruler for the 1/2 inch. Just keep changing it. Make sure that where you're drawing the line is where your 1/2 inch is intersecting your original line. So then this comes out here, 1/2 inch. For your dart and shoulder, it's a 1/2 inch. But it's going to change when it gets to the middle of the dart. So make sure that you angle this down. So there's our dart. I need a 1/2 inch on my side seams, so I'm adding a 1/2 inch. We need a 1/2 inch at the waist. And again, here at the back waist, there's no angle in the seam. It's nice and square. So this is going to come over, and then it's starting to angle. So I'm just going to do a few little hash marks so I know where that 1/2 inch is. And then you're going to come back with the curve ruler and true that all up. So here on the side seam, that should be a square corner out here. Same thing under the arm. I usually start with a 1/2 inch seam allowance that's squared and a 1/2 inch seam allowance here that's squared. And then mark every so often that 1/2 inch. And I'll take the curved ruler and I'll connect those. So you would want to mark that these are 1/2 inch seam allowances. So 1/2 inch seam allowance. I'm going to come across here and blend this together. Blend this one together. Bring this down and around that 1/2 inch. So you want to be pretty accurate here because you took all that time to draft everything according to, the mathematic calculations for those areas. And if you change your seam allowance and don't continue to have that correct, then all that good drafting that you did is lost. So I'm really going to be stressing the importance of accuracy. Let's see. Let's get this neckline in here. Your lines should all be very crisp and clear. I don't want to see a bunch of feathery, tracey kinds of sketchy lines because this is pattern drafting and it's very technical. So your lines should be neat. It's going to be really hard for someone to interpret them if you haven't made them neat and precise. There we go. All right. Your seam grain line, if you come over from the center back, I usually put a CB where it's a center back. You want to come over about 1 inch. And grain lines should be really long. I don't want to see a stubby little 2-inch line here. This is my grain line. I'm just going to color that in so you can see it. And then there's the arrow there. You want to mark that it's a grain line or straight grain, however you want to spell it out. Typically a pattern to sew would have notches. So at some point when we're drafting, we would come up from the underarm about 3 inches, which is right here. And this would be where I'd have a double notch because it's the back. That tells me when I cut this fabric out and I set it aside that it is the back. So that looks pretty good. You do the same thing to the front. And then what we'll do is later on we'll be making a muslin. We're not going to have to do it like right now. But to make sure that your side seams are the same, let's lay the front down. And if I lay my 2 edges, my seam from my front and my back, I can see that I am about 1/8 of an inch off. So, because the tissue paper is see-through, I can see right here, that's where I would be sewing it together. And then, so you don't do it on the edge, that's your seam allowance, you're doing the seam. And you'll see here that this is about 1/8 of an inch longer. So I'm going to maybe split it between the two. So I might bring my waist down on the side about 1/8 of an inch. And this is referred to as truing up. So where I had this curved waist, I'm going to split that amount. So I'm going to bring that down to about here. So put a little hash mark through the line that you changed. So that will mean that this will also come down that little bit. And then underneath, on this pattern, I know that I'm going to bring my waist up to there. So this little curved line here is going to move up about 1/8 of an inch. So that becomes the new side. So that's what's called truing up. We want to make sure that at every instance we make things match in order for them to match up when you go to sew. For the shoulder, I can take and overlap my shoulder. So I'll start at the neckline. So again, you're not doing it from the seam allowances, you're doing it from where you would actually sew. So here is my stitching line. I'm going to lay this over top of it, and when I come to where the dart is, I'm going to mark a little notch on the seam underneath of where the dart would be, and then I'll slide my dart over as if I had sewn it, and then check this part of the shoulder to see if it matches up. Boy, it matches up perfect. So once the dart is sewn, this seam will be the same size. You always fold the darts in or use a notching method. So sometimes what I might do to check this seam is also fold the dart in as if I'd sewn it. When you fold it, you're going to hold your finger on the point because you don't want it to extend down. You're going to fold it back over itself and match it up as if you'd sewn the dart. And here's where, again, we have to look at truing up. So what happens is this shoulder seam jumped up. So I'm going to take my ruler and I'm going to blend this. So from the shoulder to the neckline, I'm going to draw a new line. So now this, and it was only about 1/16 of an inch and 1/16 that way. So now that I've done that, I've got to readdress this little point of the dart. So bring this line up to the center of the dart and this one up to the center of the dart. And you'll see that it jig jogs. But when you close the dart, what's going to happen is it's going to match up on that seam allowance. So you want to correct the seam allowance also. So this is going to come down, and then it's going to go up, and then it's going to go across. So a little bit more here. So these are some of the corrections that you'll have to do. It never comes out perfect. You're always having to make a few little corrections to make sure that things will true up. So that's just a brief overview of how you trace your pattern. To label the pattern, you want to make sure that you're putting information on here. So this is a bodice back. And this would require that you cut 2, because we're not cutting this on the fold. We're going to have a seam in the back for a zipper. I generally like to put the date on things that I've made so that if I generate another pattern that's very similar, I know which one was the first one I made, when there was a second pattern that was made. So today is the 24. So this, I did this on 1/24/2021. So that's it. That's our bodice back, and you would do the same thing for the bodice front.